Jessamy hadn't meant to walk into anyone. She had mapped this corridor 1,000 times in her mind, counting the stones beneath her feet, tracking the draft that curled from the eastern windows, listening for the particular echo that told her the ceiling vaulted higher, near the junction with the great hall. She knew every corridor in the lower palace the way sighted people knew their own reflections, but someone had moved the supply cart. She felt the absence of it too late, the gap in the air where something solid should have been, and her internal map lurched sideways. She adjusted, pivoted left, and walked directly into a wall of living heat. The impact knocked the breath from her lungs. Her hands flew up on instinct and landed flat against a chest that felt like it had been carved from stone. Broad, impossibly solid, radiating warmth that soaked through the thin fabric of her sleeves. The scent hit her next, and it nearly buckled her knees. Cedar and iron and something beneath, both that she had no name for, something wild and ancient that spoke directly to a part of her she had spent her entire life ignoring. Her wolf, dormant and quiet since the day she was born, stirred. Not stirred, lunged. The sensation was so foreign, so violent in its sudden urgency, that Jessamy gasped and stumbled backward. But a hand caught her elbow before she could fall. Large fingers closed around her arm with a grip that was firm without being painful, steadying her with an ease that suggested whoever this was could have held her upright with a single finger. The corridor had gone silent. She could always feel silence. It had texture, weight, temperature. This silence was glacial, the kind of quiet that falls when every person in a space stops breathing at the same moment. Someone to her left made a strangled sound, half gasp, half whimper. A guard, she thought, based on the faint creak of leather armor. Boots shuffled. Metal clinked. But no one spoke. Jessamy's heart hammered against her ribs. She was suddenly and horribly aware of several things at once. Her hands were still pressed flat against this stranger's chest. His heartbeat thudded beneath her right palm, slow and powerful and absolutely steady, despite the chaos her own pulse was producing, and he had not let go of her arm. "I am so sorry," she managed, her voice coming out higher and thinner than she wanted. "Someone moved the supply cart and my count was off, and I did not realize anyone was standing here." Nothing. No response. Just that steady heartbeat under her palm and the suffocating weight of the quiet around them. She should pull her hands away. She knew that. Her brain was screaming it. But her wolf, that strange, newly awakened thing inside her, was pressing forward with a hunger that terrified her. "Stay," it seemed to say. "Stay, stay, stay," Jessamy asked, attempting a smile. She suspected looked more like a grimace. "I promise. I am not in the habit of assaulting people in corridors." This was a one-time navigational failure. A breath, his breath. She felt it ghost across her forehead, unsteady in a way that contradicted the perfect calm of his heartbeat. Then his grip on her arm shifted, not releasing, but gentling. His thumb moved once against her inner elbow, a slow stroke that sent lightning up her spine. And then he spoke. "I finally found you." The words were barely above a whisper. Low and rough, like they had been dragged from somewhere deep inside him, against his will. They landed on Jessamy's skin like a physical thing, like hands cupping her face, like heat pouring into every cold and lonely corner she had ever known. She did not understand them. She did not understand any of this. But her wolf did, and the sound it made inside her was something between a sob and a howl. "I beg your pardon," Jessamy whispered. His hand released her arm. The contact vanished so abruptly she nearly swayed. She heard him step back. One step, two, and the distance between them felt like a wound opening. "Sire," a voice to her right, tight, barely controlled. "Sire, are you well?" "Sire," the word detonated in Jessamy's skull. Sire, as in, Your Majesty. Sire, As in The King, she had just walked face first into the chest of the Alpha King of Arendelle and stood there, with her hands pressed against him, like she was checking him for a heartbeat. "Oh gods," Jessamy breathed. "Your Majesty, shall I remove her?" Another voice, harder clipped, a senior guard by the tone. No, the king's voice. Still low, still rough, but edged now with something that sounded like authority settling back into place over whatever had just cracked open. "No one touches her." Jessamy heard the guard's sharp intake of breath, heard the collective confusion ripple outward through every person in the corridor. She stood frozen, her hands still tingling where they had pressed against him, her wolf still keening, and tried to understand what had just happened. She heard his footsteps retreat, measured, deliberate, each one landing with the weight of someone who commanded the ground beneath him. But at the edge of her hearing, just before he turned the corner, she caught something that no one else would have noticed. A tremor, the faintest break in rhythm, a half-step, a hesitation, as if walking away from her had cost him something physical. Then he was gone, and the corridor erupted. "Do you have any idea what you just did?" The senior guard's voice was closer now, sharp with barely contained fury. "You touched the king. You put your hands on the Alpha King of Arendelle. He has killed men for less." Jessamy swallowed hard. Her knees felt unreliable. In my defense, he was standing in the middle of a corridor with no audible warning. "He is the king. He can stand wherever he pleases." "Fair point," Jessamy conceded. Someone gripped her shoulder. Different hands, gentler. "Come with me," a female voice murmured quickly, "before Halden decides to arrest you." Jessamy let herself be steered away, her legs moving on instinct while her mind reeled. The king's scent still clung to her palms. His whispers still echoed in her skull, vibrating against the walls of her memory, like a bell that refused to stop ringing. "I finally found you." What did that mean? Found her. She was nobody. A blind Omega who worked in the palace wash-house, sorting linens by texture, because it was one of the few jobs where sightlessness was not a liability. She had no rank, no pack, no bloodline worth speaking of. She had been left on the palace steps as an infant, with nothing but a wool blanket and a name stitched into its corner. There was nothing to find, and yet his wolf had spoken to hers. She had felt it. Not heard, not seen, felt. A resonance so deep it bypassed every sense she had and struck something primal. Her wolf, silent for 23 years, had answered. That terrified her more than the guards, more than the fury of the corridor, more than the possibility that she had just committed a crime, punishable by execution. Because wolves did not wake for strangers, and kings did not whisper to servants like they were prayers being answered. The summons arrived before dawn. Jessamy was elbow-deep in damp bedsheets when a knock came at the wash-house door, 3 sharp raps that silenced the morning chatter of the other workers instantly. "Jessamy Thorne," a voice she did not recognize, formal and clipped. She straightened, pushing a strand of hair from her face with the back of her wrist. "That depends on who is asking." "The king's beta." The wash-house went so quiet Jessamy could hear the water dripping from the sheets into the stone basin. Every woman in the room was staring at her. She could feel the weight of their attention, like sunlight through glass, focused and burning. "Of course he is," Jessamy muttered under her breath. She dried her hand on her apron and walked to the door, navigating the familiar room without hesitation. 14 steps from the basin to the door. She had made the walk 10,000 times. The guard outside guided her through corridors she had never walked. The upper palace where the stone was smoother beneath her feet, and the air smelled different. Less lye and damp wool, more beeswax and old oak. She counted her steps out of habit, building a new map in her mind. But the route twisted so many times, she lost confidence in her tracking by the 3rd staircase. They stopped. A door opened. The room beyond smelled of leather and parchment and cold tea that had been sitting too long. Miss Thorne, a voice calm and measured, came from the far side of the room. Thank you for coming. Please, sit. Jessamy found the chair by brushing her fingertips along the wall until she reached its back. She sat, folded her hands in her lap, and tried to project a calm she absolutely did not feel. My name is Sorrel. I serve as beta to His Majesty King Calum Ashvane. I know who the king is, Jessamy said. We met yesterday, briefly and violently. A pause. She could not read his expression, obviously, but the quality of his silence suggested something between surprise and reluctant amusement. That is precisely why you are here, Sorrel continued. I need to ask you something, and I need your honest answer. When you made contact with the king yesterday, in the corridor, did you notice anything unusual about his behavior? Jessamy considered this carefully. He told me he had finally found me, which, given that we have never met, I would categorize as unusual. Another pause. Longer this time. She heard Sorrel shift in his seat, the faint creak of a chair bearing the weight of a large man adjusting his position. Anything else? He asked. Jessamy bit her lip. Admitting that her dormant wolf had suddenly erupted to life at the king's touch felt dangerously personal, like handing a stranger a blade and hoping he would not use it. His heartbeat was very slow, she offered instead. Slower than it should have been for someone who had just been walked into by a stranger. Everyone else in the corridor was panicking, but he was calm. Supernaturally calm. Miss Thorne, I am going to be direct with you, Sorrel said. His Majesty has been unwell. The details are confidential, but I need your help with something, and I need you to trust me enough to agree before I can explain further. That is an extraordinary thing to ask of someone you summoned before sunrise, Jessamy replied. It is, Sorrel agreed, and I would not ask it if the situation were not desperate. Desperate, the word landed heavily. Jessamy thought of the king's whisper, the broken quality of it, the way his thumb had stroked her arm like he was confirming she was real, the tremor in his step as he walked away. What do you need me to do? She asked. Sit in a room with the king while he works. Nothing more. Do not speak to him unless he speaks first. Do not approach him. Simply be present. Jessamy frowned. You want me to sit in a room? Yes. Doing nothing. Correct. While the king of Arundel does paperwork. Precisely. May I ask why? You may ask, Sorrel said pleasantly. I may not answer. Jessamy exhaled slowly through her nose. Every instinct told her to refuse. This was strange and unexplained things in palaces had a habit of ending badly for the powerless. But beneath the fear, her wolf pressed forward again, that same pull she had felt in the corridor. Toward him, toward whatever was happening. Fine, Jessamy said. But if anyone tries to execute me for sitting in a chair, I want it on record that I objected. The walk to the king's study felt endless. Sorrel guided her himself, one hand hovering near her elbow without touching, directing her with quiet words. Left here, 3 steps down, mind the threshold. He was considerate in a way that suggested he had thought carefully about how to guide someone who could not see. The study door opened, and the scent hit her like a tide. Cedar and iron, and that nameless wild thing beneath. Her wolf strained forward so hard she stumbled. Easy, Sorrel murmured. Jessamy gripped the doorframe and steadied herself. She could hear him. The king. The scratch of a pen on parchment. The slow rhythm of his breathing. The shift of fabric as he moved his arm across the page. He did not look up when they entered, or perhaps he did. She would never know. Sorrel guided her to a chair along the wall, and she sat. The leather was cold beneath her, and she pressed her palms flat against it, grounding herself. The king's pen continued its steady rhythm. The fire crackled. A clock ticked somewhere to her right. Minutes passed. Jessamy listened. She tracked his breathing, the way a sailor tracks the wind, noting every shift, every catch, every subtle change in depth and rhythm. He was tense. She could hear it in the controlled precision of each breath, the way he held air a beat too long before releasing it. His body was fighting something. 10 minutes. The pen slowed. His breathing roughened, and she heard a sound she recognized on instinct, even though she had no frame of reference for it. A growl. So deep and low it was barely audible, vibrating at the base of his throat like a warning. Jessamy's blood went cold. A chair scraped. Someone across the room, an advisor she had not realized was present, stood abruptly. She heard the sharp intake of breath that meant fear. "Your Majesty." The advisor's voice was strained. "Perhaps we should reconvene later." The growl deepened. Jessamy felt it in her sternum, a physical vibration that made the air itself feel dangerous. Her wolf should have been terrified. Every instinct of an omega, faced with an alpha, in the grip of something primal, should have been screaming at her to flee. Instead, her wolf did something inexplicable. It reached out, not physically. She did not move from the chair. But something inside her unfurled toward the source of that growl, like a hand extending in the dark. A softness, a calm that was not hers, but moved through her. Anyway, the growl stopped, not gradually, not tapering off. It stopped, like a flame being snuffed. The quiet that replaced it was stunned. Jessamy heard the advisor's shaking exhale, heard Sorrel's sharp, tight breath from the doorway, heard the king's pen resume its path across the page as if nothing had happened. 20 minutes passed without incident. 30, an hour. The advisor spoke in careful, measured tones about grain levies and border patrols, and the king responded in a voice that was low and steady and entirely impossibly controlled. Jessamy sat in her chair and tried to understand what she had done. When Sorrel finally guided her out, his hand trembling almost imperceptibly against her elbow, they made it halfway down the corridor before he spoke. "That has not happened before," he said quietly. "Which part?" Jessamy asked. "Any of it." His voice was careful, but she could hear the undercurrent of something vast beneath it. Hope or fear, she could not tell which. "His Majesty has not gone that long without an episode in over a year." Jessamy stopped walking. An episode. That growl. The tension. That was an episode? Sorrel did not answer directly. "You will be compensated for your time. I will send for you again tomorrow." "Wait," Jessamy said. "What is wrong with him? What was that growl? What did I do?" But Sorrel was already walking away, his footsteps retreating down the corridor with a purpose that left no room for further questions. Jessamy stood alone in the unfamiliar hallway, surrounded by echoes and the lingering ghost of his scent on her skin, and felt the first cold stirring of certainty that she had just stepped into something far larger and far more dangerous than a king with a bad temper. 3 days passed. Each morning, Sorrel sent a guard to collect Jessamy from the wash house, and each evening she returned, more confused than the day before. The pattern was always the same. She sat in the king's study while he worked. His wolf threatened to surface, the growl building like distant thunder, and then something inside Jessamy reached out without her permission, and the storm dissolved. He never spoke to her, not once in 3 days. She heard him speak to others. His voice was a low, controlled instrument that gave away nothing. He asked precise questions. He issued commands that were obeyed instantly. He listened to reports with a patience that suggested he missed nothing. But he never addressed her, never acknowledged her presence, never gave any sign that he was aware of the blind woman sitting against his wall, doing absolutely nothing, while his wolf tried and failed to devour his mind. On the 3rd evening, Jessamy went to see Tanith. The head healer's quarters smelled of dried rosemary and candle smoke, and the particular bitterness of medicines being prepared. Jessamy navigated the cluttered room from memory, dodging a stack of books she knew sat 3 steps past the door. And the low stool. Tanith, always left in the most inconvenient possible location. "You look terrible," Tanith said by way of greeting. "Thank you. Sit before you fall over." Jessamy sat. "I need you to tell me what is wrong with the king." Tanith was quiet for a long moment. Jessamy heard the pestle stop its grinding, heard the old healer set it down with a soft clink against the stone mortar. "Close the door," she said. Jessamy did. "What I am about to tell you stays between us." Not because the king commanded it, but because if this information reached the wrong ears, it could mean his death. Jessamy's stomach dropped. She gripped the edge of her chair and nodded. "The king is going feral," Tanith said. The words hung in the air like a blade. Jessamy knew what feral meant. Every wolf knew. It was the thing mothers whispered about to frighten children into obedience. It was the reason packs existed, the reason bonds mattered, the reason wolves were never meant to be alone. A feral alpha lost the boundary between human and beast. The wolf consumed the man, devoured reason and mercy and self, until nothing remained but instinct and rage. And once an alpha went fully feral, there was only one outcome. They were put down. "How long?" Jessamy whispered. "It has been building for over a year," Tanith replied. "Since the Ashenmere campaign. Something happened on that battlefield that wounded his wolf so deeply. It began to turn inward, consuming the human mind instead of coexisting with it." "The episodes," Jessamy said, understanding crashing over her. "The growling, the loss of control. Those are his wolf trying to take over, more frequently each month," Tanith confirmed. "We have tried everything. Sedatives, bonding herbs, pack resonance therapy, even bringing in omegas from allied territories to attempt a calming influence. Nothing worked. His wolf rejected everything and everyone." A pause, heavier than the last. "Until you." Jessamy's throat tightened. "What is different about me? I do not know," Tanith said honestly. "But 3 days ago, his wolf went silent in your presence for the first time in over a year. Sorrel wept when he told me, and that man does not weep. The council does not know the full extent," Tanith continued. "Sorrel and I have been managing it between us. But the episodes are getting worse, closer together, harder for the king to pull himself back from. 2 months ago, he lost control during a private meeting and nearly killed an advisor before Sorrel could restrain him." Jessamy felt sick. "He remembers everything," Tanith added, her voice softer now. "Every episode, every loss of control, every moment where the wolf takes him. He is aware the entire time, trapped behind his own eyes, watching his body do things he cannot stop." Jessamy's eyes burned. She pressed her palms together in her lap. "Which brings me to the question I know you are too kind to ask," Tanith said. "Why you and not someone else?" The old healer moved across the room. "I have a theory, but I need you to answer me honestly. When you touched the king in the corridor, what happened to your wolf?" Jessamy hesitated. She woke up. "Woke up? She has been silent my entire life. I thought she was dormant or broken or just absent, but when I touched him, she lunged. Not aggressively, more like recognition." Tanith's quiet stretched on, and when she spoke, her voice was careful in a way that made Jessamy's pulse spike. "There is a reason a dormant wolf would wake for one specific person and no other," Tanith said slowly. "There is a reason an alpha on the edge of feral would go silent in the presence of one specific omega and no other." Jessamy's breath caught. "No," she said immediately. "Jessamy, no, that is not possible. He is the king. I wash his bed sheets for a living. We are not bonded. We are not mates. Your wolves disagree," Tanith said simply. "My wolf has been asleep for 23 years. She does not get a vote." Tanith let out a dry, clipped huff. "Unfortunately, that is exactly who gets a vote. The bond exists whether you acknowledge it or not. You are not just any omega. You are his omega. His wolf knows it, even if neither of you is ready to accept it." Jessamy pressed her hands to her face. She could feel the heat in her cheeks, the sting behind her sightless eyes, the overwhelming, dizzying impossibility of what Tanith was telling her. "This changes the arrangement," Tanith said. "If a mate bond is forming, proximity will strengthen it. The closer you are to him, the more effective the calming influence will be. Sorrel and I have discussed it. We need you to move into the king's private quarters." Jessamy dropped her hands from her face. "You want me to live with him. I want you to be close enough to keep him alive. In his rooms. Yes, where he sleeps. That is generally what rooms are for." Jessamy stood up abruptly, the chair scraping back against the stone floor. She paced 3 steps, turned, paced 3 steps back. Her wolf was pressing against her ribs, that insistent aching pull that pointed in one direction and one direction only. "Toward him!" "Fine," she said, the word coming out strangled. "But I need a proper bed, not a pallet on the floor. And if anyone so much as implies that I am there for anything other than medical purposes, I will make them regret it." Tanith's voice carried a trace of amusement. "I will make sure of it." That evening, Sorrel escorted Jessamy through corridors she had never walked. Upper Palace, where the air changed and the echoes told her the ceilings were high and the walls were hung with things that absorbed sound. Tapestries, she guessed, or furs, rich things for rich people. Her new bed had been placed inside the king's chambers, close to the fire. Jessamy explored it by touch, running her hands over the frame, the mattress, the pillow. The sheets smelled freshly laundered, and she felt a strange pang knowing she had probably washed the set before this one herself. The king arrived later. She heard him enter, heard the door close behind him, heard the heavy pause when he registered that she was there. The beta explained the arrangement. His voice came from across the room, careful and formal. "He did. And you agreed to this." "I did." Another pause. She tracked his movements by sound. He crossed to the window, his boots muffled by a carpet she could feel the edge of with her toes. He stood there for a long moment, and she could hear his breathing, that same controlled rhythm she had memorized over 3 days of sitting in his study. "I want you to know," he said, and his voice had shifted, losing some of its formality, "that you may leave at any time. You are not a prisoner here." "Thank you, Your Majesty." Kylum. Jessamy blinked. "What?" "My name. If you are going to sleep in my chambers, you should probably use it." Something bloomed behind her ribs. She bit the inside of her cheek to keep from smiling. "Good night, Kylum," she said. A beat of silence. Then, quieter than she expected. "Good night, Jessamy." She lay in the dark and listened to him settle into bed. The rustle of sheets, the creak of the frame under his weight, the slow adjustment of his breathing as he tried to relax. She could feel him the way she felt, heat from a fire, a constant awareness that pulsed in time with her heartbeat. 20 minutes passed. His breathing changed. Not the rough, threatening shift she had learned to dread in the study, but something gentler, a deepening, a loosening, the sound of a body surrendering to sleep for the first time in longer than it should have been possible to endure. Jessamy lay still and listened to the king sleep, and in the dark, where no one could see, she let herself cry, not from sadness, from the overwhelming, terrifying weight of understanding that this man's life was somehow in her hands, and she had absolutely no idea what she was doing. Jessamy learned the shape of the king's life by sound. She learned that he rose before the sun, his movements quiet and deliberate, as if he was trying not to wake her. She learned that he paused by her bed each morning, standing there for a handful of seconds without speaking before moving to his dressing room. She learned that he favored his left shoulder when he was tired, the faint catch in his movement betraying an old injury he never mentioned. In the evenings, when the palace settled and they were alone in his chambers, she learned that the silence between them had weight and texture, and that it changed night by night. The first week was rigid, formal. He spoke in short clipped sentences. She responded in kind, afraid of saying the wrong thing, afraid of overstepping. But the quiet had a way of wearing people down, and Jessamy had never been built for silence. It started on the fifth night. She was lying in her bed, staring into the darkness that was no different from her daylight, and the words came out before she could stop them. "What color are the walls?" The question hung in the air. She heard his breathing pause. "What?" he asked. "The walls. In this room. I have been sleeping here for 5 nights, and I have no idea what color the walls are. It is mildly distressing." A long pause. When he spoke, his voice sounded different, less guarded, almost caught off balance. "Gray," he said. "Dark gray stone, with lighter veins running through it. That sounds grim. It is a castle. Castles are allowed to have color. Are there tapestries?" "2, above the mantel, and beside the window." "What do they show?" Another pause, and when he answered, she could hear him paying attention to the details in a way that suggested he had not looked at his own walls in a very long time. "The one above the mantel shows a hunt. Wolves running through a forest at dawn. The light is gold and green, and the artist made the trees look like they are bending out of the way." He stopped, then continued, slower. "The one beside the window is older. A pack gathering, I think. Wolves in human form, standing in a circle around a fire. Their faces are faded, but you can still see the expression on the woman in the center. She looks like she is about to say something important." Jessamy smiled into the dark. "You described that beautifully." She could feel his discomfort from across the room, the sharp awareness of a man who had accidentally revealed something soft and was now bracing for judgment. "Thank you for telling me," she added. "Most people just say the walls are gray and leave it at that. Most people can see the walls for themselves," he replied. "Exactly. Which is why they never bother to really look." The quiet that followed was different, like a door had cracked open between them, and neither was willing to close it. The next night, she asked about the view from his window. The night after that, the pattern on the carpet, then the color of the sky at sunset, then the way the fire looked when it was dying. Each time, he answered with the same reluctant precision, describing things he had stopped noticing long ago. And each time, she felt him relax a fraction more. The formality eroded, replaced by something cautious and fragile that she handled with extreme care. On the 9th night, Jessamy told him a story. Not intentionally. She was trying to fill a heavy silence, and what came out was a rambling account of the time she had accidentally sorted the Duke of Thornmere's silk undergarments into the kitchen linen pile. The cook found them in the morning and assumed they were some kind of exotic pastry cloth, Jessamy said, fighting to keep her voice steady. She used them to strain a custard. The Duke wore his best silk pair to a state dinner that evening, and commented to his wife that they smelled unusually of vanilla. Then, a sound she had never heard from him. A huff of breath through his nose, bitten off almost immediately like he had tried to stop it, and failed. Not quite a laugh, but the material from which laughter is made. Jessamy grinned in the dark. Over the following days, she pushed further. She told him about the time she had fallen into the palace fountain. Because no one had warned her, the path had been rerouted for a garden party. She told him about the kitchen cat who had somehow gotten into the armory and fallen asleep inside a ceremonial helmet, and the guard who had put it on the next morning without checking. She could not see his reactions, but she could hear them. The almost logs grew longer, less guarded. His breathing changed when she was mid-story, loosening into something that sounded like anticipation. And once on the 12th night, he laughed, a real laugh, low and startled, like it had escaped from a room he had locked years ago and forgotten about. The sound of it did something devastating to Jessamy. Something sharp and aching that made her grip the edge of her blanket and press her face into the pillow so he would not hear the way her breathing had gone unsteady. "How do you remember all of this?" he asked. "I listen," Jessamy said simply. "When you cannot see, the world becomes a collection of sounds and stories. People forget I am there, which means I hear everything. I am the most dangerous person in this palace, information-wise. He was quiet for a moment. I believe that, she smiled. You should. I know things about your senior counsel that would end careers. Now you are trying to frighten me. Is it working?
More than you know.
He said, and his voice had dropped into something lower. Something that was not about council secrets at all. She changed the subject before the moment could become something neither of them was ready for. But the walls were down now, or at least full of cracks, and through those cracks, real conversation began to seep. He asked her questions in return, how she navigated the palace, how she sorted linens by touch. He asked with genuine curiosity, not pity, and that distinction mattered more than she could articulate. Then the questions grew deeper. What did she dream about? Was she lonely? Always, she admitted before she could think better of it. Not always in the obvious way, more like a background noise that never stops. The feeling that everyone else is sharing something you are not invited to. Expressions, glances, the way people communicate without words. I miss things I have never had, which is a very specific kind of loneliness. He was quiet for a long time. After that, when he finally spoke, his voice was rough in a way she had come to recognize as emotion being held carefully in check. I know that kind of loneliness, he said. Something shifted between them that night. An understanding, wordless and mutual, that settled into the foundation of whatever they were building. That was the night his wolf reached for her. Jessamy was half asleep, drifting between consciousness and dreams when she felt it. Not a growl, not the violent surge she had come to associate with his episodes. This was different. A press. Gentle and tentative and almost questioning, like a wild animal pushing its nose against a closed hand. Her wolf responded instantly, and the contact sent a flood of sensation through her body that made her gasp. She heard him make a sound across the room, a low, startled exhale. His sheets rustled, the bed frame creaked. "Jessamy," he said into the dark, his voice strained. "Did you feel that?" "Yes," she whispered. "It has never done that before. My wolf has never reached for anyone. Not gently. Not like that. Neither has mine," she whispered. She heard him sit up, heard his feet hit the floor, and his footsteps cross the room toward her, stopping at the edge of her bed. "May I?" he started, then stopped. Started again. "May I take your hand?" In answer, she reached out into the dark. His fingers found hers immediately, as if she was the one thing in the room he would never lose track of. His grip was calloused and careful, holding her like she was something precious and breakable. The moment their skin touched, both wolves answered, not violently. It was more like two rivers, meeting and joining, that was as natural and inevitable as gravity. "Stay," she said softly. "Just this. Just for tonight." He lowered himself to sit on the edge of her bed. His thumb traced slow circles against the back of her hand, and she could feel the tremor in his fingers, the effort it took him to hold still when everything in him was pulling closer. They stayed like that, hand in hand in the dark, until his breathing finally evened out and his grip went slack with sleep. Jessamy listened to him sleep and felt her wolf settle for the first time in her life, curling up inside her like it had finally found the place it was meant to be. She did not sleep for a long time. She was too busy memorizing the feeling of his hand in hers and trying not to think about how much it was going to hurt when he inevitably let go. The hand-holding became a nightly ritual, neither of them acknowledged by daylight. Each evening, after the fire had been stoked and the doors closed and the palace had settled into its deep stone silence, Kylam would cross the room to her bed. He never announced himself, but Jessamy always knew, the moment he stood. The particular shift in the air, the way the floorboards responded to his weight. He would sit on the edge of her bed, and she would reach out, and their fingers would interlock, and the wolves would settle, and the world would narrow to the space between their palms. Some nights they talked. He told her about the eastern provinces, the way the river looked in winter when ice formed in patterns that resembled script. She told him about the laundry women who sang while they worked, harmonizing, without planning it, their voices rising up through the stone like steam. He described the color of his mother's eyes, which he said were the precise shade of new copper. She described the sound of rain on the washhouse roof, which she said was the closest thing to music the world made without trying. Other nights, they said nothing at all, and the silence between them was its own language. Though small things appeared without explanation, a candle on the table, nearest her bed, that was always lit before she arrived. A thicker blanket that materialized on a cold evening, a pillow that smelled faintly of lavender. Her favorite, though she had never told him that. She noticed everyone. She said nothing. But she smiled each time, and she suspected he noticed that too. But it was not enough. Jessamy could feel it. The calming effect of proximity was losing ground. His wolf pressed harder each day, the growls coming more frequently during their daytime sessions, taking longer to subside. She was holding back a tide with her bare hands, and the water was rising. Tanith confirmed what Jessamy already suspected. The bond needs deeper contact to strengthen, the healer said, her voice clinical. Hand-holding across separate beds is not sufficient. His wolf needs more proximity. Sustained physical contact through the night. Jessamy's stomach flipped. You are telling me to sleep in his bed. I am telling you that the alternative is watching him go feral within the month. That evening, Jessamy stood in the king's chambers and tried to figure out how to tell a man she was supposed to maintain professional distance from that she needed to sleep in his bed. The healer says you need more contact, she began, her voice carefully neutral. Caleb was by the window. She could hear the scratch of his pen. The scratching stopped. More contact, he repeated, his tone flat. Physical proximity. Through the night. Sustained. A pause that stretched until it ached. Jessamy, you do not have to do this. I know. Then, why are you offering? Because your wolf is eating you alive and I am the only thing that stops it. Because every night, I hold your hand and feel you surrender to sleep, and it is the most important thing I have ever done. Because my wolf will not stop howling until I am closer to you. Because it is the practical solution, Jessamy said. She heard him exhale. Fine, but the pillows stay. How many pillows do you have? Enough. It turned out to be 6. Jessamy discovered this when she climbed into his bed and found herself navigating a small mountain range of down and linen. She arranged herself on the far side, as close to the edge as possible without falling off, and pulled the covers up to her chin. The mattress dipped as he settled on the other side. The distance between them was perhaps 2 feet, but she could feel him as vividly as if they were touching. You are very rigid, he observed. I am trying to maintain appropriate boundaries, with 6 pillows between us. 5. I moved one, a breath that might have been amusement. Caleb, she said softly, give me your hand. His fingers found hers across the pillow barrier. His breathing deepened, slowed. She felt the exact moment sleep pulled him under, the way his hand went heavy in hers, the way the tension drained from his body, all at once. An hour passed. 2. The fire died to embers. Then his grip tightened. Not the gentle squeeze of a sleeping man shifting positions. This was sudden, crushing, his fingers clamping around hers like a vice. She gasped and tried to pull back, but his hand held her fast. His breathing roughened. A growl began building, deeper and more guttural than anything she had heard from him before. The vibration traveled through the mattress and into her bones. Selim, she whispered. Selim, wake up. The growl intensified. His body went rigid beside her, every muscle locking tight. She could feel the wolf surging forward, not the gentle press she had come to know, but something savage, something that wanted out. Jessamy reached for him with her free hand and pressed it flat against his chest. The contact sent a shockwave through the bond, and what happened next she would never be able to fully explain. The room vanished. The bed, The embers, the smell of cedar, all of it stripped away and replaced by something else entirely. Sound hit her first. A roar of noise so vast and layered it was almost incomprehensible. Screaming. Metal on metal, a grinding shriek that set her teeth on edge. The wet, heavy sound of impact, of bodies falling. The earth shook beneath her feet, and the air tasted of iron and smoke, and something worse, something she recognized on instinct as blood. And somewhere ahead of her, she heard him. Not Kylam. A howl that was not grief and not rage, but both at once. A sound so anguished. It tore through her like a physical wound. She moved toward it, her hands outstretched, her bare feet stumbling over ground that felt wrong beneath them. The sound shifted. Battle noise receded, replaced by something closer, more intimate, more terrible. Voices she did not recognize, crying out in surprise and terror. Not enemies. These were his people, his soldiers, his pack. She felt what he felt. The horror of watching his own body move without his permission. The searing need to stop, to pull back, to regain control, and the absolute inability to do so. Hands reaching for him, not to fight but to plead, and the wolf cutting through them because it could not distinguish friend from threat. Jessamy screamed his name, not the king's name. The wolf's name, the true name she should not have known but somehow did, pulled from the bond like a thread from a tapestry. The battlefield went silent. She woke, gasping, wrenching upright in the dark. The bed, the pillows, the dying fire. Real. She was back. Beside her, Kylam was awake. She could hear his breathing, ragged and fast, and something else beneath it. The broken cadence of a man trying very hard not to fall apart. "What did you see?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. "I did not see anything," Jessamy said, still shaking. "I heard it. I felt it. The battle. Your soldiers. Your wolf." "You were not supposed to go there," he said, and his voice cracked on the last word. "That place is mine. That burden is mine. You should never have been inside it. Kylam, what happened at Ashenmere?" "Get out." The words came harsh and sudden, a door slamming shut. He pulled his hand from hers, and the loss of contact left her reeling. She reached for him. Her fingers found his arm, and she felt him flinch. A full-body recoil, as if her touch had burned him. "Do not touch me," he said, and the anguish beneath the command was so vast, it stole her breath. "Please. I cannot bear it if you touch me right now." "I am not afraid of you," she said quietly. "You should be. Because the thing you just felt, the wolf, that cannot tell the difference between the people it loves and the people it needs to destroy, that is what lives inside me, every hour of every day. And I will not let it touch you." He left. She heard his footsteps cross the room, heard the door to his dressing chamber close, heard the lock turn with a finality that echoed through the empty room. Jessamy sat alone in the king's bed, her hand still tingling where his had been, and felt the first crack form in something she had not realized she was building until it started to break. The absence was a living thing. It moved into the spaces where his presence had been and filled them with cold. Jessamy returned to the washhouse the following morning, and the familiar smell of lye and damp linen, which had once been her entire world, now felt like a punishment. Sorrel came to see her that afternoon. His footsteps were heavier than usual, his voice carrying the particular strain of someone who has been arguing unsuccessfully with a man who outranks him. "The king has ended the arrangement," Sorrel said. "He believes your proximity puts you at risk." "His wolf would never hurt me," Jessamy replied. "That is precisely what I told him. He does not agree." "How bad are his episodes without me?" Sorrel did not answer immediately. "He had 3 yesterday. One lasted nearly 40 minutes. The third one, he did not come back for almost an hour. Sorrel had to physically restrain him. Jessamy pressed her hand against the edge of the wash basin, steadying herself. "The council is beginning to notice," he continued. "The captain of the guard has privately requested authorization to assemble a containment protocol." The words were careful, clinical, and underneath them, Jessamy heard what Sorrel would not say outright. A containment protocol for a feral alpha meant chains and silver, and eventually, a blade. "You have to let me back in," Jessamy said, her voice shaking. "He has given a direct order. No one is to bring you to his chambers, his study, or any room where he is present, so he is choosing to die rather than let me help." Sorrel was silent for a long time. "Yes, I believe he is." The days that followed were a slow unraveling. Jessamy worked in the wash house and tried to pretend that everything was normal, that the ache in her body was fatigue and the trembling in her hands was exhaustion. But her wolf knew better. Her wolf howled. Not audibly, not in any way anyone else could detect, but inside her, a continuous keening cry that vibrated through her bones and made every breath feel like it was being drawn through broken glass. The headaches started on the second day. Dull at first, a pressure behind her sightless eyes that she could almost ignore. By the fourth day, they were blinding in a way that was cosmically unfair, given that she was already blind. On the fifth day, her hearing began to falter. Sounds that had been crisp and layered and rich, the soundtrack of her entire existence, went muddy and distant, as if someone had packed cotton into her ears. She lost the echo map of the wash house, stumbled into the supply cart, knocked a basin of water onto the floor, and stood in the spreading puddle, shaking, because without her hearing she was not just blind, she was nothing. She was a body in a void. Tanith found her that evening, sitting on the floor of the healer's quarters, her arms wrapped around her knees. "Your wolf is rejecting the separation," Tanith said, and for the first time since Jessamy had known her, the healers sounded afraid. "The bond is incomplete but active. Being apart from him is not just emotional distress. It is a physical rejection. Your body is shutting down." "My hearing," Jessamy said, and her voice broke on the word, Tanith. "My hearing is going. If I lose that, I lose everything." Tanith's hand tightened on her wrist. "The bond requires completion or proximity. Without either, the deterioration will continue." Jessamy pressed her forehead against her knees. The world was getting quieter, and for someone who had built her entire existence out of sound, quieter was the same as smaller, the same as less, the same as disappearing. On the seventh day, Jessamy was summoned to the council chamber. Councillor Marin had requested a tonic for his recurring gout. She almost refused. The council chamber was in the upper palace, close to the king's quarters. But she was still a servant, and servants did not refuse. The walk took longer than it should have. Her steps were uncertain now, her internal maps degraded by the hearing loss. She moved with one hand trailing the wall, counting stones by touch instead of echo, and every step felt like a small defeat. She reached the council chamber, pushed open the door, stepped inside, and felt him. He was there. She had not been warned. The bond lurched forward with such violent force that she staggered, and in the same instant she heard a sound from across the room that froze her blood. A snarl, low and agonized, followed immediately by the crash of a chair being shoved backward. "Get her out!" someone shouted. "Get her out! Now!" But Jessamy could not move. Her wolf was screaming, and the world was tilting, and she realized with distant clinical clarity that her legs were giving out. She heard her name. Not from the panicked advisors, not from the guards rushing forward, from him. One word, ripped from his throat with a force that silenced every other sound in the room. "Jessamy?" And then she was falling, and the world was very quiet. And the last thing she felt before the darkness took her was the impact of arms catching her, strong and shaking, pulling her against a chest that thundered with a heartbeat she would have known anywhere in the world. She surfaced slowly, like rising through deep water. Sound returned in fragments. A fire crackling, the clink of glass against wood, breathing, not hers, ragged and close. She was in the infirmary. She recognized the creak of the cot frame. And someone was holding her hand, both hands, wrapped around hers like he was trying to keep her from being pulled away by a current only he could feel. Jessamy, his voice, close enough that she could feel his breath on her fingers. Jessamy, open your eyes. That will not help, she murmured. They do not work. A sound escaped him that was halfway between a laugh and a sob. His forehead dropped against their joined hands, and she felt moisture on her knuckles. The Alpha King of Arendelle was crying. She heard Tanith behind him, heard Sorrel's breathing from the doorway. She heard all of it, every sound crisp and clear and layered, and relief flooded her so completely she nearly wept herself, because her hearing was back. He was touching her, and her hearing was back. "You stubborn, impossible man," Jessamy whispered. "Tanith told me about your hearing, about the deterioration." His voice was shattered, stripped of every defense. "I did this to you. I tried to protect you, and I nearly destroyed you instead." "Yes," Jessamy agreed. "You did, but I am here now. And if you let go of my hand again, I swear on every god this kingdom has ever worshipped that I will find my way back to you just to tell you what an idiot you are." His thumbs traced circles against her palms, and the bond between them hummed like a plucked string finding its resonance. "He needs to tell you the truth," Tanith said from across the room. "All of it, now." Jessamy felt Calum tense. "No more secrets," the healer continued, her voice iron. "No more noble self-destruction. You tell her what happened at Ashenmere, or I will. And I will not be as gentle." Jessamy squeezed his hands. "I heard your soldiers. I felt what your wolf did. Please just tell me." His breathing shuddered. He released one hand, but kept the other, holding on like she was the only solid thing in a world that was falling away beneath him. "Ashenmere was supposed to be a liberation," he began, his voice low and carefully controlled, each word measured. "A rogue alpha, named Valkyrin, had seized control of a settlement on our western border, enslaved the pack there. We marched to free them." He paused. "The battle was worse than we expected. Valkyrin had prepared for us. My wolf was already unstable by then. I had been hiding it for months. The episodes, the loss of control. I thought I was strong enough." His hand trembled in hers. "I was not. In the middle of the battle, my wolf broke free. Fully. I lost myself. When I came back, when I was myself again." He could not finish. She heard his breathing fracture. "How many?" Jessamy asked very quietly. "7." The word was barely audible. "7 of my own soldiers. My own pack. People who trusted me to lead them, to protect them. My wolf could not tell the difference between enemy and ally." "One of them," he continued, and now his voice had dropped to something she had to strain to hear, "was a young soldier named Brennan, 18 years old. He had been assigned to my personal guard 3 days before the campaign. His mother had been so proud." Jessamy felt tears slide down her own cheeks. "He called my name," Selim whispered. "When my wolf turned on him, he called my name because he thought I would recognize him. He trusted me to stop. And you could not." "No, I could not." She pulled his hand toward her, pressed it against her chest, held it there over her heartbeat. "That is why the wolf is eating you," she said, her voice thick with tears. "It is not just going feral. It is punishing itself. It killed Pack, and it cannot forgive itself. And neither can you." "You think you deserve this," Jessamy said. Not a question. His silence was the answer. She lay in the infirmary cot, Tanith's order, not hers, and stared into her permanent dark and thought about a wolf that was destroying its human because it could not bear what it had done. She thought about Brennan, 18 years old, calling the king's name with trust in his voice. She thought about Quilem sitting in his study for a year, fighting for control, minute by minute, feeling the wolf press harder each day, knowing that eventually it would win, and that maybe, on some level, he would never admit to, he thought it should. And she thought about herself, a blind omega with no name, no pack, no bloodline, left on a doorstep like something discarded, spending 23 years trying to take up as little space as possible, convinced that her worth was measured in usefulness, and that the moment she stopped being useful, she would be discarded again. She understood his guilt in a way she wished she did not. The terrible logic of self-punishment, the way it disguised itself as justice, the way it whispered that suffering was the same as paying a debt, and that healing was the same as forgetting. It was not the same. It was never the same. "You are not sleeping," Tanith observed from somewhere nearby. "Neither are you. I am monitoring a patient. I fainted. I did not contract the plague." "You fainted because an incomplete mate bond was systematically shutting down your senses in response to forced separation from your bonded partner. That is slightly more serious than skipping lunch." Jessamy sat up slowly. "Tanith, if I complete the bond, if we complete it, will it save him?" The healer was quiet for a long moment. "A completed mate bond is the strongest anchor a wolf can have. It would give his human side a tether that the wolf cannot override." She paused. "But it cannot erase the guilt. That is a wound no bond can heal by itself, I know. But it would keep him alive long enough to try. Yes, it would." Jessamy swung her legs off the cot and stood. Her body felt fragile, hollowed out, but her hearing was sharp, and her mind was clear, and her wolf was burning inside her with a certainty that left no room for doubt. "Where are you going?" Tanith asked. "To see the king. He gave orders that you are not to be admitted to his chambers." "I did not ask about his orders." Tanith's silence carried the distinct flavor of a woman trying very hard not to smile. "The guards change rotation at midnight. There is a 4-minute gap between shifts at the east stairwell. The king's chambers are the third door on the left." Jessamy paused. "For someone who has been encouraging professional distance, you are remarkably well informed about guard schedules." "I have been the head healer of this palace for 31 years, Tanith replied. "I know everything that happens in these walls, including when stubborn kings need to be overruled by women who love them." Jessamy felt heat rise in her cheeks. "I did not say I love him. Child, you did not have to." The corridors were empty at midnight. Jessamy moved through them by touch and memory, her fingers trailing the wall, counting doors and turns. The east stairwell exactly where Tanith had described. The gap between guard shifts, exactly 4 minutes. The third door on the left, heavy oak under her palm, unlocked. She pushed it open and stepped inside. His scent enveloped her, and her wolf threw itself forward with such force she had to brace herself against the doorframe. Cedar and iron and anguish, and underneath it all, the bond pulling her toward him with the gravity of something inevitable. He was not in bed. She could hear him by the window, his breathing rough and uneven, the breathing of a man who had not slept and was holding himself together through nothing but willpower. "You should not be here." His voice came from the dark, rough, and unsurprised, as if he had known she would come, as if he had been waiting. "You are right," Jessamy said, closing the door behind her. "I should not be here. I should be in the wash-house, sorting linens, and pretending my world is not collapsing. I should be following orders and staying away, and being the invisible, obedient, useful little Omega. Everyone expects me to be." She walked toward him. No hand on the wall, no counting steps. She navigated by the bond alone, following the pull, like a compass pointing north. "But I have spent my entire life being what other people needed me to be," she continued. "And for the first time, I am going to be what I need to be." She stopped. He was close. Close enough that his heat reached her skin, close enough that she could hear the catch in his breathing, the way his body tensed as if bracing against the pull that was dragging them both toward the same center. Jessamy? Her name in his mouth, a warning and a plea. If you stay, I cannot promise to keep my distance. The bond, my wolf. I am barely holding it together. Then stop holding it together. You do not understand what you are asking. I understand exactly what I am asking. She reached out. Her fingers found his chest, found the fabric of his shirt, found the heartbeat hammering beneath it. I am asking you to let me in all the way. I am asking you to stop punishing yourself for something your wolf did when it was wounded and terrified. I am asking you to trust me enough to believe that I have felt the worst of what lives inside you, and I am still here. His hand came up and covered hers, where it pressed against his chest. She felt the tremor in his fingers, the war between restraint and surrender playing out in the pressure of his grip. I killed them, he whispered. My own people. Brennan was 18 years old. I know. How can you stand there and touch me knowing what these hands have done? Because the man who grieves those deaths so deeply that his wolf is consuming him from the inside out is not a monster, Jessamy said, her voice breaking. He is a good man carrying an unbearable weight, and he has been carrying it alone for too long. Something in him gave way. She felt it, a collapse not of strength, but of the walls he had built around the wound. His forehead dropped against hers, and his breathing shattered into something undefended. I am so tired, he said, and the confession carried the weight of 14 months of sleepless nights and swallowed screams and a guilt so heavy it had nearly buried him alive. Jessamy cupped his face in both hands. His skin was rough with stubble along his jaw, wet, where tears had traced paths he would never have allowed anyone else to see. Then rest, she whispered. Rest and let me hold you, and we will figure out the rest together. He kissed her. It was not smooth or practiced. It was clumsy and tasted of salt, his mouth, finding hers in the dark with a certainty that bypassed sight entirely. His hands cradled her face, tilting her head, and the kiss deepened into something that stole the air from her lungs and replaced it with need and the bone-deep rightness of finally being exactly where she was supposed to be. Stay, he said against her mouth. Stay, stay, stay. I am not going anywhere, she promised. He carried her to the bed, laid her down with a gentleness that contradicted every rumor she had ever heard about the fearsome Alpha King. His hands shook as they found the hem of her nightgown, and he stopped. Tell me to stop, he whispered. No. Jessamy, she pulled him down to her. No. What followed was overwhelming and tender and terrifying all at once. She experienced everything through touch and sound, the closeness of him, the care in his hands, the way he paused at every sharp breath she drew to ask if she was all right. She could not see his face, but she heard him. Every sound he made was a revelation. The catch in his breathing when her fingers traced the scars on his shoulders, old wounds she mapped with careful hands, the broken whisper of her name when the distance between them finally closed. The mating bite came at the peak. He pressed his mouth against the curve of her neck, and the bite unlocked something inside her that blazed, like a star igniting. The bond snapped into place, a golden thread connecting them at every level. Body, wolf, and soul. She bit him back. That found the place by instinct, the junction of his neck and shoulder, and his answering sound was something she would carry inside her for the rest of her life. They lay tangled together afterward, his arms wrapped around her so tightly she could feel every heartbeat against her back. The wolves were quiet for the first time. Not dormant, but settled, curled around each other somewhere deep in the bond, content in a way that felt ancient and right. Your wolf, Jessamy whispered. I can feel it. It is calm. For the first time in over a year, he said, his voice rough with wonder, completely calm. She threaded her fingers through his. I finally found you, she murmured, echoing his first words back to him. His arms tightened. His lips pressed against her hair. No, he whispered. You found me. Jessamy smiled in the dark and let sleep take her, and for a few perfect golden hours, neither of them dreamed of anything at all. Jessamy woke inside the wolf's mind. She knew it immediately. The way she knew darkness. The way she knew sound. This was not the king's chambers, not the tangle of sheets and skin, and the steady drum of his heartbeat against her back. This was somewhere else entirely, and the bond that now hummed golden and complete inside her told her exactly where. The ground beneath her bare feet was soft, in a way that living ground should never be. Not earth, not grass, but something that yielded too easily, as if the world itself was wounded here and could not bear weight without flinching. The air was thick and hot and carried the taste of iron, the unmistakable signature of blood, so pervasive it had soaked into the atmosphere like weather. And the sound. It was not the roaring chaos of the battlefield she had experienced before. This was quieter, worse. The aftermath, the terrible stillness that follows violence, punctuated by sounds that would never leave her. Labored breathing from lungs that were failing. A voice, young and confused and fading, calling a name that no one would answer. Brennan. Jessamy's throat closed. She moved forward, her hands outstretched, navigating this nightmare, the same way she navigated every space in her life, by what she could feel and hear and sense through the dark. She found Selim first, not the man, the wolf. Or rather, what remained of the boundary between them. He was on his knees in the center of the carnage, and she could feel both halves of him simultaneously through the bond. The human, rigid with horror, trapped inside his own skull, screaming silently at hands that would not obey him. And the wolf, enormous and anguished, pacing in frantic circles around the bodies it had made, unable to understand what it had done, unable to stop the howl that poured from it in an unbroken stream of grief. The howl was the worst sound Jessamy had ever heard. It was not rage, it was recognition. The wolf had come back to itself just enough to understand the devastation it had caused, and the understanding was destroying it from the inside out. This was what he lived with. This was the loop his wolf replayed every time his control slipped. Not the battle, not the enemies, but this, the moment after, when the red cleared and the wolf looked down and saw pack blood on its teeth. Jessamy knelt beside him. The guilt was a living architecture here, a structure built from 14 months of relentless self-punishment, and it was vast and intricate and so deeply embedded that she could not tell where it ended and the man began. Kylam, she said, I am here. He did not respond. He was listening to something she could hear with devastating clarity, Brennan's voice, fading now. The confused last words of a boy who had died calling his king's name. Your wolf is not going feral because it is broken, she said, the understanding crystallizing as she spoke. It is going feral because it is grieving. It killed Pack, and Pack is the one thing a wolf exists to protect. So it is tearing itself apart, because it cannot reconcile what it did with what it is. She heard his breathing change, sharper, closer to the surface. And you let it. You let your wolf consume you because you believe you deserve it. Because 7 people died and you could not stop it, and in your mind, the only appropriate punishment is to let the thing that killed them destroy you too. I know how that feels, Jessamy said, and her voice dropped to something unguarded. Not the killing, not the battle, but the belief that you deserve to suffer. The certainty that if something terrible happened because of you, it must be because you were not good enough. She pressed her hand against his back, felt the tension coiled there like a spraying wound past its limit. I was left on the palace steps when I was 3 days old, she said. No note, no explanation, just a blanket with my name on it, and a baby that somebody decided was not worth keeping. His breathing caught. I spent 23 years believing that story, that I was not worth keeping, that I had to earn every scrap of space I occupied by being useful, by being quiet, by being invisible. Because if I was too loud, or too much, or too present, someone would realize the mistake and throw me away again. She felt tears on her face and did not wipe them away. Do you know when I stopped believing it? The night you described those tapestries. You described the light in a painting like you were seeing it for the first time, and you did it because I asked you to, because a blind woman in your bed wanted to know what the world looked like through your eyes. And you gave it to me, without hesitation. Her voice steadied. A man who does that is not a monster, Calum. He is not a creature who deserves to be consumed by his own guilt until there is nothing left. He is a man who made an impossible choice in an impossible situation and lost control in a way that cost lives he would have given his own to save. She paused. Brennan's death was a tragedy. All 7 of those deaths were tragedies. But they were not a verdict. And letting your wolf eat you alive will not bring any of them back. It will only add your name to the list of people destroyed by that battlefield. She felt the wolf's howl falter. Not stop, but waver, like a flame caught in a sudden draft. Your wolf needs to hear this too. Protecting pack does not mean being perfect. It means doing everything you can and surviving the times when everything you can is not enough. She reached out through the bond, not with words, but with feeling. The calm she carried inside her, the quiet certainty that had kept her upright through 23 years of darkness. The stubbornness that had walked her into a king's chambers at midnight and refused to leave. You can put them down, she said softly. You can remember them without carrying them. Grief is not a chain. It is allowed to be a scar that heals instead of a wound that stays open. She felt his hand close around hers. Not grabbing, not clutching. Deliberate. A choice. His fingers threaded through hers, and she felt the moment he stopped fighting and started letting go. It was not dramatic. There was no flash of light, no thunderclap, no cosmic resolution. It was quieter than that, smaller than that. It was a man exhaling a breath he had been holding for over a year and discovering that the world did not end when he let it out. The wolf's howl softened, shifted, changed from grief to something gentler, something that was still sad but no longer self-destructive. A mourning sound, not a punishment. The bodies in the dark did not vanish. Jessamy could still feel them at the edges of this place, still hear the echo of Brennan's voice. They were not erased. They would never be erased. But they were still, now, settled. I am sorry, Keelam whispered. And the words were not directed at Jessamy, but outward, toward the echoes of the people he had lost. I am sorry I was not enough. I am sorry I could not stop it. I will carry you with me, but I will not let carrying you destroy the people who are still here. His hand tightened around Jessamy's. Especially not her, he added, barely audible. I will not let it destroy her. The nightmare dissolved. Not shattered, not torn apart, but released, like fingers unclenching from something held too tightly for too long. The battlefield faded, the sounds retreated. The terrible soft ground beneath them firmed and became cotton sheets and feather mattress, and the familiar creak of an ancient bed frame. Jessamy opened her eyes to darkness. The real, ordinary, permanent darkness she had lived in since birth. Kylam was awake beside her. She could feel his breathing, shaky but steady, and through the bond she felt something she had never felt from him before. Peace. Not the absence of pain. Pain was still there, a deep ache that would take months or years to fully heal. But the corrosive, consuming quality of it was gone. It was just grief now, and grief could be survived. You followed me in, he said again. Someone had to, Jessamy replied. You have terrible navigation in your own subconscious. A sound that was almost a laugh. His arm tightened around her waist, pulling her closer, and she felt him bury his face in her hair. "Is it over?" she asked. "The loop?" "Yes, I think so. I can still feel my wolf, but it is not pushing. It is not fighting. It is just." He paused, searching for the word, resting. Jessamy smiled against his chest. "Your wolf learned that from me. My wolf learned everything important from you." He pressed his lips against her temple. They lay in the dark together, the bond humming between them like a song in a language older than words. And for the first time, the quiet was not heavy, or charged, or fragile. It was just quiet. And quiet was enough. The wolf did not heal overnight. Calum still woke sometimes, in the dark, his body rigid, his breathing sharp, the ghost of a howl caught in his throat. On those nights, Jessamy reached for him without speaking, pressed her palm against his chest, and let the bond do what it was built for. The tension would leave his body in slow stages, and he would pull her close and fall back into sleep, with his face buried in her neck. The episodes stopped, not gradually, but completely, like a fever breaking. His wolf was no longer fighting for dominance. It had found its anchor, its tether, the one thing strong enough to hold the boundary between man and beast in place. Their mating was not received quietly. A blind foundling Omega, elevated to the side of the Alpha King, was the kind of scandal that kept the court whispering for months. Jessamy felt the stares she could not see, heard the conversations that stopped when she entered a room, caught the sharp edge of judgment in voices that thought she could not hear as well as she could. "She cannot even look at him," a noblewoman murmured to her companion as Jessamy passed through the great hall one afternoon. "What kind of queen cannot see her own king?" Jessamy kept walking. Her steps were sure. She had mapped every corridor in the upper palace by now, every stairwell and doorway and uneven flagstone. She moved through the king's world with the same quiet confidence she had once reserved for the wash-house. And if the court could not reconcile a blind queen with their expectations, that was a problem with their expectations. Calum handled the whispers with characteristic patience, which is to say, none at all. The first nobleman who suggested the king might reconsider his choice of mate was reassigned to a border outpost so remote that supply wagons took 3 weeks to reach it. "Was that necessary?" Jessamy asked when Sorrel told her. "Probably not," Kylam admitted, "but it was satisfying." Months passed. The kingdom settled. She kept her position in the infirmary, 2 mornings a week, working alongside Tanith, because she refused to become a queen who existed only in ceremony. She learned the upper palace by heart, memorized the names and voices of every advisor and servant and guard, and developed a reputation for knowing things about the palace that no one had told her. "Information-wise," Sorrel observed one evening, his tone carefully neutral, "you may actually be the most dangerous person in this kingdom." "I told you," Jessamy replied, smiling. On a morning in late autumn, Jessamy woke to the sound of rain against the windows, and Calum's arm draped across her waist. She lay still, listening. His breathing was deep and even, and utterly peaceful. No tension in his body, no restless shifting, no wolf clawing at the edges of his control. She pressed her hand over his where it rested against her stomach. His fingers tightened around hers in sleep, a reflex so familiar it had become as natural as breathing. She thought about the corridor, the supply cart that someone had moved. The impact of walking into a wall of living presence and finding, in the most unlikely way possible, the one person in the world whose brokenness fit perfectly against her own. She thought about the darkness she lived in, and the darkness he had lived in, and how, between them, they had built something that did not need light to be beautiful. Outside, the rain fell. Inside, the king slept beside his mate, and the wolf inside him dreamed of nothing at all. Jessamy smiled, closed her sightless eyes, and listened to the sound of peace.